It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend getaway, a chance to escape the chaos of city life and reconnect with nature. My two closest friends, Mike and Emily, had convinced me to join them on a camping trip in a remote area of the Appalachian Mountains. They promised it would be fun, a break from the monotony of work and responsibilities. I wasn't much of an outdoorsy person, but I didn't want to be the buzzkill, so I reluctantly agreed. Looking back, I wish I hadn't. The drive to the campsite was uneventful at first. We left early in the morning, the car packed with supplies and gear. The farther we got from the city, the quieter it became. Trees lined the winding roads, their thick branches creating a canopy that blocked out the sun. By the time we reached the dirt path leading to the campsite, the signal bars on our phones had disappeared. "It's perfect," Emily said, leaning out the window to admire the dense forest. "No distractions, just us and nature." Mike chuckled. "Let's hope you don't get bored without Instagram." I rolled my eyes but said nothing. Something about the area felt off. The forest was too quiet, the kind of silence that makes you realize just how alone you are. We arrived at the campsite around noon and began setting up. The spot was picturesque, a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, with a crystal-clear stream running nearby. Mike pitched the tent while Emily and I gathered firewood. By evening, we had a roaring fire going. We sat around it, laughing, telling stories, and roasting marshmallows. For the first time in a long while, I felt relaxed. The worries of the world seemed distant, buried beneath the crackling flames and the cool mountain air. But then, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily brought up the trail. "There's supposed to be an old hiking trail near here," she said, her face illuminated by the firelight. "It's not on any maps, but I read about it online. Apparently, it leads to some abandoned cabins." Mike raised an eyebrow. "Abandoned cabins? Sounds like the start of a horror movie." Emily grinned. "Come on, it'll be fun. We can check it out tomorrow." I didn't like the idea. Something about it felt wrong, but I didn't want to be the one to ruin the trip, so I kept my mouth shut. The next morning, we set out to find the trail. Emily had a vague idea of where it was based on the blog she'd read, but it wasn't easy to locate. After an hour of wandering through dense undergrowth, we finally stumbled upon it, a narrow, overgrown path that snaked its way deeper into the forest. "This has to be it," Emily said, her excitement palpable. The trail was old, barely visible in some places. Branches hung low, and the ground was uneven, covered in moss and leaves. As we walked, the forest seemed to grow darker, the trees pressing closer together. The air was cooler here, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. About an hour into the hike, we came across the first cabin. It was small and decrepit, its wooden walls warped with age. The windows were shattered, and the door hung on its hinges. "Let's check it out," Emily said, already heading toward it. "I don't think we should," I muttered, but Mike followed her without hesitation. Reluctantly, I trailed behind. The inside was worse than the outside. The floorboards creaked under our weight, and the air was thick with the smell of mildew. There wasn't much inside, just an old table, a few broken chairs, and what looked like a rusted stove. But there was something on the wall that made my stomach churn. A series of carvings, deep and jagged, covered the wooden planks. They weren't words or pictures, just random scratches and symbols. "What do you think these mean?" Emily asked, running her fingers over the carvings. "Probably just some vandalism," Mike said, though he didn't sound convinced. I didn't say anything. I couldn't shake the feeling that we shouldn't be there. We pressed on, following the trail. About 20 minutes later, we found another cabin. This one was larger and in slightly better condition, though it still looked abandoned. As we approached, I noticed something strange. The front door was open, swinging slightly in the breeze. "Maybe someone's been here recently," Mike said, though he didn't sound too confident. Emily stepped inside, and Mike followed. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to turn back. But I couldn't let them go in alone. The inside of the cabin was eerily similar to the first. Same creaking floorboards, same musty smell. But this time, there was something else, a faint noise like the sound of whispering. "Do you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Hear what?" Emily replied, frowning. The whispering grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't words, just a low, guttural sound that seemed to come from the walls. "We should leave," I said, panic creeping into my voice. But before anyone could respond, the door slammed shut behind us. The whispering stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. The air felt heavy, suffocating, and the cabin seemed darker than before. Mike rushed to the door, yanking on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "It's stuck," he said, his voice trembling. Emily tried the windows, but they wouldn't open either. It was as if the cabin had trapped us. And then we heard it, a loud, deliberate thump from the ceiling. We froze, staring up at the wooden beams above us. The thumping continued, slow and rhythmic, moving from one side of the cabin to the other. "What the hell is that?" Emily whispered. Before anyone could answer, the thumping stopped. A moment later, the whispering returned, this time louder and more distinct. It sounded like multiple voices, overlapping and echoing. And then we saw it. It was standing in the corner of the room, shrouded in shadow. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was real. A tall, emaciated figure with pale, almost translucent skin. Its eyes were hollow, and its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. It didn't move, just stood there, staring at us. Mike grabbed a piece of wood from the floor and shouted, "Stay back!" The figure didn't react. It just tilted its head, as if curious, and then it spoke. "Why have you come?" Its voice was raspy and human. "We didn't mean to disturb you," Emily stammered. "We'll leave, I promise." The figure let out a low, guttural laugh. "You cannot leave. You belong to the forest now. I don't remember how we got out." One moment, the figure was advancing toward us, its bony fingers reaching out, and the next, we were running through the forest, the trail a blur beneath our feet. We didn't stop until we reached the car. None of us spoke as Mike started the engine and sped away, the forest disappearing in the rearview mirror. It's been months since that day, but the memory still haunts me. I don't know what we saw in that cabin or why it let us go, but I know one thing for certain. Something lives in that forest, something old and malevolent. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear the whispering. Even after months had passed, I couldn't escape the memories of that day. The forest, the cabins, and the figure haunted my dreams. The whispers, faint but persistent, seemed to follow me everywhere, echoing in the silence of my apartment, in the hum of my car engine, even in the stillness of the night. Mike and Emily stopped talking about what happened. I tried bringing it up once, but Mike shut me down quickly. "It's over," he said firmly, his eyes darting nervously toward the window. "Don't bring it up again." But I couldn't let it go. The whispers weren't just in my head, they were real. I could feel it. One evening, as I was going through my old camping gear, I found something strange. Tucked inside my backpack was a small, folded piece of paper. I didn't remember putting it there, and neither Mike nor Emily had mentioned leaving anything behind. Unfolding it, I saw a single word written in jagged, uneven handwriting. "Return." My stomach dropped. The memories of the cabin flooded back, and I felt a cold dread wash over me. Was this a warning? A threat? Or something else entirely? That night, the whispers grew louder. They seemed to be coming from every corner of my apartment, surrounding me, closing in. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure standing in the shadows, its hollow eyes boring into me. By morning, I had made a decision. I needed to go back. It took weeks to convince Mike and Emily to join me. Emily was the first to crack. "I can't take this anymore," she admitted during a tense phone call. "I hear things at night. I see things. If going back will stop it, fine. I'll go." Mike was harder to convince. He refused to even entertain the idea at first. But eventually he caved. "If it means putting this nightmare behind us, I'll do it," he said grudgingly. "But this is the last time." We set out early on a cold, overcast morning. The drive felt longer this time, every mile weighing heavier on my chest. When we reached the dirt path leading to the trailhead, none of us spoke. The silence between us was thick with tension. The forest looked the same as it had before, dark, foreboding, and unnervingly quiet. The moment we stepped onto the trail, I felt it again, that oppressive weight in the air, like the forest itself was alive and watching us. We retraced our steps, passing the first two cabins without stopping. Neither of us wanted to linger. It wasn't until we reached the third cabin, a structure we hadn't seen before, that we stopped. This cabin was different. It was larger and in better condition, as if someone had been maintaining it. The door was closed, but smoke curled lazily from the chimney. "Someone's here," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. Mike hesitated, then stepped forward and knocked on the door. The sound echoed unnaturally, as if the wood were hollow. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the door creaked open, revealing darkness beyond. We stepped inside cautiously, the floorboards groaning under our weight. The cabin's interior was surprisingly clean, almost pristine. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the walls. And then we saw him. A man sat in a chair by the fire, his back to us. He was thin, his skin pale and stretched tight over his bones. His head was bald, and he wore simple, tattered clothes. "You came back," he said, his voice raspy and weak. "Who are you?" Mike demanded, his voice shaking. The man didn't turn around. "I've been waiting for you. You shouldn't have come here the first time. But now it's too late." "What do you mean?" Emily asked, stepping closer. The man finally turned his head, and I felt my blood run cold. His eyes were hollow, black pits, and his lips were cracked and twisted into a cruel smile. "You woke it," he said. "You brought it back, and now it won't stop until it has all of you." The man began to laugh, a dry, choking sound that sent chills down my spine. "It's older than this forest," he said, his voice growing louder. "Older than the mountains. It was sleeping, and you woke it. What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer. Instead, he pointed to the far corner of the room, where the shadows seemed to ripple and move. The figure stepped out of the darkness. It was taller than I remembered, its hollow eyes burning with a strange light. "You shouldn't have come back," the man said again, and then he dissolved into ash, scattering in the wind that blew through the cabin. We ran. I don't remember how we made it out of the cabin or how we found the trail, but we ran until our lungs burned and our legs threatened to give out. The whispers followed us, growing louder and more frantic. By the time we reached the car, the sun was setting, casting long, menacing shadows across the forest. We piled in, and Mike floored the gas pedal, the tires kicking up dirt as we sped away. But the whispers didn't stop. Even as we left the forest behind, I could still hear them, faint but persistent, like a distant echo. It's been weeks since we returned, and things have only gotten worse. The whispers are louder now, more distinct. I've started seeing the figure in my dreams, and sometimes in the shadows of my apartment. Emily stopped answering my calls. Mike moved to another state without telling anyone. I'm starting to think the man in the cabin was right. We woke something in that forest, something ancient and angry. And now it's coming for us. I don't know how much time I have left, but if you're reading this, heed my warning. Stay away from the forgotten trail.